pre-independence generation, so they take on huge, enormous responsibilities, you know, in terms of who they carry as symbols of the family. And he was one of those kind of characters, you know, long career in public service. So you have no idea what he's been holding until he's no longer there. And so the disarray starts to play out in front of you. Now, over the years, I've been to funerals. I've been to my grandfather's funerals, but always from a distance. You know, you come at the day of the burial, you know, so you engage with that, but never quite. It's happening to those people over there. It's happening to those old people. And for the first time, it's happening to me, and I have no language for expression. Because all I'd seen over the years was just contained adults, you know. So all of my fathers, I never saw my father crying at any funeral. I certainly didn't see him crying at his burial of his own father, my grandfather. So this is what we knew. You contain yourself and you engage yourself in duty. You know, what are the roles you need to do, you know, apply yourself. That was the script. The difference, though, I started to notice is we who were kind of socialized into modernity and urbanism, you know, who then grew up in the city, were at a very different posture around grief. Those of my cousins who now lived in the village, who grew up in the village, in Kenya we have this thing, we say, wachilia. They let it go. And I write the story of my cousin called Jim Manyang, who unfortunately also passed. Jim Manyang was a stoic, you know. It was, if you ever caricature of a Gor Mahia fan, you know, like a stoic man. And he just lost it, you know, like almost the point of it's chaos and ruling almost. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these men just like losing it. And for the first time I realized, oh, it's okay. And it's not even okay in the sense that you will yourself to, but the force of the emotion is so strong that you find yourself swept in it. And so it took a lot of, and so that's why I started examining. And when I started examining in the context of the book, I asked the question of why are we like this? And ultimately it's the power of example, and it's how we're socialized to deal with grief and loss. Because the idea, first of all, is not even accepted. We live in constant denial of it. That means our lives are limited because we don't live in preparation for it. And so therefore, when it happens, our first instinct is denial. And then secondly, we're from cultures where the only rule in the town is stoicism. You know, hold your frame upright, and so everybody doesn't break down. Because the belief is, and that's the irony of it, is that in breaking down, you lose it and you might drift and never come back, you know, in your grief. But what I learned, humbly, through all of this journey, is that actually it's the other way around. Is when you actually go into the breaking of grieving, is where the true strength arises.
So what's interesting also in the book is not only do you talk about that part of grief, but you also talk about now the characters, like you mentioned, whispers, the columnists. So you also mentioned people like, do you remember Mzee John? Remember? And you remember how we all were waiting, loved watching him, and we saw him as a big figure. In Kenya, he was in the 90s. They are the ones who began comedy for us in Kenya. And when you see those characters, like it's whispers of Mzee John, and then you find out that later, of course, everybody gets old or gets sick, and how they died, and how it happened, how they died, and the people you would think you watch on TV and you think their lives must be good, but died with huge hospital bills and all these issues, and you reflect on that too. When you were researching these stories, how did it change your perspective of legacy, and what happens when you are this person, when you're alive, and different when you're dead?
Yeah, it's almost it's this tragedy of heroism. I mean, in Kenya, and it's like the rest of the world, but Kenya in particular is notorious for it. We love you, you know, then we forget you, and then you die, then we love you again. It's literally and over the years I've watched all of this, my heroes, they disappear from the spotlight and then only hear about them when they're dead, and we're all like, oh God, why do they have hospital bill? We must do something. We must do something for John. We must I mean, you literally go to the Kenyan paper every other month, there's a version of that story happening. So it forced me to really, because I mean, in a way you're kind of in the public space, you know, so this happens, you have no control over how the public views you. And sometimes you occupy a rather larger than expected role in the public psyche. And so there's two great men for me, in particular because of my profession. So there's for context, there's a man called Mzee Oyunga, Benson Manjao. And the reason why he's particularly, I think he was completely underrated in terms of people don't quite understand his significance, is that Oyunga comes up to the time. So first of all, we're just moving into what is becoming public TV. We're moving from a single station, which is the Voice of Kenya, to now multiplicity of channels, right? So in terms of core comedy, which is slapstick comedy, he becomes like the father of it. He's the first universal character within Kenya that everybody can resonate with. But he's also doing something quite political at the time. He's managing, so his character type is that he's one man from one ethnic group acting as somebody from the other ethnic group. He personifies that character so well that we don't even realize that we think he's a Luo man. He's actually Kikuyu. So all over the years. And if you understand Kenya's history, there's a lot of political rivalry between these two groups of people, right? And that's quite toxic in ways. But Oyunga is navigating it in a way that allows everybody just to laugh at themselves completely. And as a result of Oyunga, all of the character casts that come after him take some version of that. You know, so Muka Twende, who we think is this, is somebody else, or Toromongo, who we think is this, is something. Everybody's in basically ethnic characterization. And they're basically breaking these walls that we have basically been held onto. And their space is this thing in Vitimbi, which is basically, it's a restaurant, which is basically a representation of Nairobi, where we all come from different pockets of the country, and we meet and we're stuck in a capitalistic machine, and we're trying to make the best of it. You know, so that's Oyunga. And then number two, on top of that, he has a wife who's very dominant, who's much bigger than him physically, and so he's, even from a point of relationships, he's doing something that's not typical for us in our homes, you know, because he has a woman in his house who has a complete voice. So this is Oyunga. And of course you're not making sense of it at the time, you're just watching this thing. It's years later when you reflect and you think, oh, man, this man has basically shaped our psyche. And so he goes on and basically the result of it, a whole genre of comedy emerges after him. You know, so now that Kenyan slapstick characterization, it's all from, he literally is the godfather, he is the first. So now we've got this whole generation, Churchill, Eric Omondi, whole bunch of amazing comedians in the Kenyan space. But Oyunga's story is tragic in the sense that he hits the peak of his career. The same organization that he had helped build and work with for the longest time, basically kind of ease him out, you know, ageism. Anybody who's over 50 years will start can relate, you know. After a while, it's like, hey, there's nowhere to go. Just, you know, go, you know. Well, go retire. Don't you have grandkids? You know, so this is what happens to Oyunga. And then he gets this big medical, and then of course because of our challenges of our health system, he dies in a way that I thought was quite undignified. You know, and the same thing happens to Wahome Mutai, who's our first satirical writer, like basically what you call a national columnist. If you ever had a proper national columnist, one that everybody read across generations. But Wahome Mutai is more than just a columnist. He's a radical columnist. At a time when we're living in a period of tyranny, he's able to basically voice the reality of the country, but through satire. And he's doing this column for 25 years. So that's a long time, you know? Yeah, so he's been around. So he's literally a figurehead. And then he's also doing theater, and he's a man who was also incarcerated for his political consciousness. He spent time in torture, in Nyayo chambers, you know, and comes up with his writing. Wahome Mutai dies, he had gone to literally have a non-cancerous thing, yeah, removed from his thing. And he goes into a coma, 133 days, and he dies. And so I'm looking at all of these guys, and I'm thinking, okay, so this is their fate. And then you could that same story goes on to sports stars, you can go to sports stars, you know, a whole bunch of people. And we tend to kind of lean in Kenya towards more the political figures. We forget about the contribution of the cultural artists and the sports stars in terms of what their contribution is. So this was really my attempt to start saying that we need to start paying attention to this people. But more than that is, for me, the real reflection was like our lives. We have to start paying attention to how we live our lives, in the sense that if you outpour, I call it now, I found a term for it, I call it career grief. This idea that your identity in terms of professional career completely encompasses you. That when it ends, you started dying a long time ago. You know? And I saw this as the fate of a lot of our heroes. That and a hero's journey is brief. You know, they have a moment, you know. Eliud Kipchoge, he's taken us to, you know, break under 2 hours. First man to do that. This number of gold medals, marathon championships. Now he's no longer winning. What's the story? Oh, retire, slow down, go home. And then for the person in that position, how do you allow yourself to die to that life, to continue living? And for me, that was the lesson of all of these heroes, you know, that yes, you could have been in the public persona in that way, but that life ends, but life continues on. And so you must find that second life to continue. Yeah.
I will ask one more question. I know everybody wanted to ask something. Let me ask one more, and then we can move on to some questions from the audience. One that really shook me because, you know, when you had a conversation with your nephew, Didi, and it touches me because you're talking to the young generation. And he was having a conversation about a DJ in Kenya called DJ Lithium who committed suicide. And
died by suicide.
Died by suicide, excuse me. Yes, that's very important, died by suicide. And so it's having this conversation about manhood and what it is to have or go through these emotions of, if it's depression, of loneliness, but it seems like they're alternative because they're not able to express it, is that. And you know, the question is, what would you tell young men at these ages as you see and reflect all things that are going on, and very young people dying for something that we could have had a conversation about?
It's heavy in that regard. It's really heavy. If you look at Kenyan statistics recently, and the numbers are not pretty in terms of the number of deaths related to suicide. I recently did a piece reflecting on it. It was very difficult to write that particular chapter because I just didn't have enough context. I come from a generation where it's a cultural taboo, so we have no language for it. The most we know is really just pity, neglect, and just denial. And the only response we had to it was, a man has to be strong. You know what I mean? Why did you talk to your friends at the very worst? Kunywa kitu, drink something. That was the response. That's all we knew. That's all we knew. And so when some context for this particular reference she pretended is making is that I'm out here and my cousin calls me and it's winter and it's like, hey, how you guys surviving the winter? You know, like it's in our CVs these days. Now if you have done 2 years in Europe, you put it in the CV that you survived the winters. And you do it. And that's what comes up, and it tells me about this young man who's passed on in this tragic way. And then he goes on to this monologue of like because he was about, at the time, I think he was about in his mid-20s, so this is like his age mate. And he goes with this idea of, I've got to be tough, people have to be tough. This thing of, just checking out, that's not right. You've got to be tough. And I'm listening to him, and I want to critique him, but at the same time, I start to really listen to him. I'm saying, what is he really saying? And I realize this is all he knows. And when I ask myself the same, I realize, okay, that's all I know. What advice did I really give him? And so, at the time, I started by just telling him that, I started speaking about the illusion of strength. And I found in the story a perfect analogy, which was the big Californian redwood, which can withstand all kinds of storms. It can withstand all kinds of the amazing fires that sweep through the Californian plains. But the amazing thing that was really bringing it down was a really small beetle that was barely the size of my thumbnail that was now destroying this whole redwood forest, a small beetle. And I was trying to tell him, that's the illusion of strength. That if you keep thinking that you can withstand everything, a small thing like that is really what's going to destroy you. But as I reflected deeper, and I find that particular chapter, I didn't have the breath to kind of grapple with it. I found over time now, I've had time to reflect. And I've thought of the whole phenomenon of suicide as, I think the conversation is limited because it's always on the individual. So when we talk about cases of suicide, we take it from an individual perspective. But I was supposed to start looking at it as a public well-being story. And I started looking at suicide as basically a break, like a short circuit, like something that's broken. And that was just the most vulnerable person that was taken out, which means it should be a warning sign for all of us to start checking. So to move out of this idea of the individual responsibility, but to think about it communally. And the knowledge that came to me was literally a simple public health one. And there's the story told of, interesting enough, I think it was a Hungarian doctor who was based in Vienna at the time, in the 16th century. But he's the man who discovered this whole idea about washing hands. You've got to wash it.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
Yes.
What washing hands. And so when I came across this story, and for those who might not understand the story, was what was happening was that those two groups, those midwives and there was medical professionals, and what would happen is that when there was a disease problem, the same doctors who were dealing with the midwives would come and help in the bathing process, and of course they would not wash their hands, and there was a high mortality among the kind of the professional cohort, while the midwives had a very kind of lower death rate. And when they made the correlation, when this guy made the research, he said, oh, actually, you know what? We just have to wash our hands. And but in the beginning, when he said it, it wasn't immediately taken because it meant it became an accusation on the professionals. What are you trying to say about us? And in a way, I find that is our challenge when we address suicide. Because we have left it to the professionals, to the experts, to the counselors, to the wise ones, yet it's a collective responsibility. It's all of us. It just shows that somebody was vulnerable and they fell off. The job for us is to reorganize ourselves. The reason why it's so hard is that each one of us have to start looking out for each other. Yeah. And so the whole idea of family then changes from what we imagine as the immediate nuclear family to ultimately the Utu principle, which is Ubuntu, which is everybody's family. All of us, our workspaces, our neighborhood, everywhere. That interconnectedness becomes an imperative that makes it almost more difficult for someone to fall through the cracks. Because the reality of suicide, as anybody knows, I'm here but I'm gone, famous song by Curtis Mayfield, that's just the last point. But they're gone from a long time. And they're going, and finally they just find a trigger. So what we focus is on the end point. Yet we have to, when did they start to get broken? And how then as a collective do we manage it? So for me, that's the challenge that as a society we are forced to confront with. And to move away from this individual stoicism of that individual must do something, but look at it as a collective responsibility. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So we can go to the audience. I'm sure there were some questions. Any questions? Yeah? Oh, there, sorry.
So, my name is Sarah. Honorary Kenya. When I listen to you, it's surprising because you were saying in Kenya, but I could hear Nigeria in that. I could hear Ghanaian in that. You speak to anyone in Africa, you hear the same story, where especially from the men's perspective, you are told to be strong. The idea of not showing your emotion shows your strength. But at the same time, they're asking you, we are very religious people. And but when we go to church, we pray for restoration. And then you're wondering, how can you restore something that's not broken? And how can you even say something is broken if you're not admitting that there was even a problem? And so we need to, from what you're saying, I'm hearing you, is that we need to start from a point, before we ask for, or before we seek for restoration, we need to start from a point of admitting that we are broken. Because if you don't break, you cannot restore what is not broken. And if you don't admit to it being broken, you cannot even start the process of restoration. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and glad to be here.
Thank you very much. Anyone else got a question? You want to ask Lisa?
I have
Yes.
a question. You know, when I look at the wall right there, and I see 5 figures, and 3 of them are dead, they're gone. Our former president. And then here comes in a hero in the name of Baba, Raila Odinga, who dies, and in his death, this whole perception about men not crying and men holding in, and the idea of Bewa to drink something is not even working. For the first time, we saw Kenyan men really expressing themselves. And then you talk about going back to the book, and your chapter of Baba's gone. So I'm curious to know, when you went back and you were reflecting, what did you find? Were you then reflecting your own dad, who you did not mourn? Or did you mourn Baba from that chapter? So that's the first one. And then 2 is, again, is about a change of environment, because you're a Kenyan living in the Netherlands. And when you think deep about death, I don't know, many of us have a story about a couple of people in our families who died, and died in different ways. And in many ways, we always feel that that person could have survived. Maybe this was done, or this was done, or I wish. There's always a story. But personally, when I living in Europe, I feel that the death rates are lower. So my question is, living in the Netherlands and reflecting about death in the Kenyan context, what is the perception about death in the European context, and especially in the Netherlands where you live?
PhD such question. No, thank you. That really gives me a lot to reflect on. Let me start with Baba's gone. I mean, Raila Odinga, for a lot of us, transcended the political figure. He was more than just a politician. Especially when you come from my part of the world, which is Western Kenya. So he embodied a lot. So when he dies, and in the way he dies, because he dies abroad, which is something, a context I've also missed by a lot of people, because it was very interesting for me, because I'm in diaspora, so it's very relatable what it means for someone to die abroad, you know, and then what does it mean to bring the body back home, you know, to be received. So when he dies abroad, and he has to be brought back home. I'm in Kenya at the time. I've just finished my book tour. I had like a 2-week book tour. I was going around bookshops, and I've been around the country to Kisumu, Nairobi. And then on the day which I was supposed to leave, Baba dies. And so naturally, and then I do, as Ambassador mentioned, I'm an editor of a publication known as The Elephant. So this is a national moment. How do we reflect on it? How do we make sense of this loss. And what changed for me in that particular moment is I had the language. While a lot of people immediately went into the political legacy and what are the implications of political legacy, I went into the grief work. I immediately said, okay, what we have to realize that we're doing right now is we are mourning. And for a figure like this, we might be mourning for a long time. So stop putting a timeline to it. So that was my first kind of advice, in terms of even when we were doing the curatorial process for the edition. We're saying, get over this idea that this is not the kind of character you're going to mourn for 2 weeks and then you're done. This thing could be going on for a long time because it's going to be a long grieving process. And the longer it goes, the more we come to terms with the loss, in terms of what he represented as an individual and symbolically as a national figure. So he became for me an epitome of, or rather a parallel of what I'd known. And in a way, when you think about it from a journalistic perspective, it's sometimes you do something very early in your career that prepares you for a moment, and you never make the connection. So in making sense of my dad's loss of my dad, and in making sense of the in a way what you said, of the brokenness of my own people, in relation to how do we mourn somebody who was significant to us in our lives, you know, and especially as men, because women have no problem dealing with that level of emotion. But the way men have been socialized is that stoicism is all we know. And so I understood immediately that there's going to be brokenness, because that's what happened to us. In my particular story is that my inability to mourn my father plays out as basically rebellion. And it plays out in my schooling years, and it plays out for a very big part of my life, you know, where I was angry, and a kind of anger that I couldn't quite define. But literally anger, when I came to understand what it was, is just the injustice of this loss. Like, what am I going to do? It's gone. It can't be replaced. And that's exactly what's going to happen for a lot of Kenyans. The injustice of the loss, because this figure has been a part of their lives for so long that it'll be a very difficult process to reconcile until they go through the ritual of grief. Fortunately for us, and this is now the other bit that the book then ends up revealing, is that we actually have cultural tools for this process. So what I discuss in the book is my understanding of the significance of our cultural processes, which, as we know, is now a hybrid. Because we are culturalized as Christians, so we do the Christian way, which is just basically leave it all to the Almighty Father and let the interceders, who are the priests, cover you with prayers. It's great, but it's not enough. You know? So, but within our cultural context, all of these things play out. And you go to a typical Western kind of funeral, all of these things play out simultaneously. Right? So I started then getting a proper grasp of like, oh, that's what that wake is about. That's what we wait for. That's what the whole point of 2 weeks. That's the whole point of everybody coming to the house. So all of the things that I thought were traditional inconveniences. Oh, why do we always cooking? How long are we going to cook? How much? Why can't we eat in their homes? You know, like, why do we have to? All of those things, they start to make sense now. I'm like, oh, this is what's happening. You know, what are we? I mean, we buried the person already. What are we still doing in the home? Like, can we move on to our lives?
Yeah.
All of that stuff, I start to see from within a cultural context as ritual. And I realize that we actually have the tools. We can modernize them. Ritual is always adjusted. We have the tools. But the important imperative for me became this, at least as a writer, is that everything that I do in reflection now is based on examples of those who came before me. So even what I hold on to as, quote unquote, my Luo culture is largely to the examples of my grandfathers, my parents, which, when I really unpacked it, was a lot of it was Protestant Christian culture that had nothing to do with traditional Luo culture. And I just embraced it as Luo culture. So then it becomes important for those of us then who are in positions of leadership, fathers, grandfathers, position of responsibility, to be aware of the example that we are setting. Because what we do becomes ritual for those who come after us. So if, for example, if we minimize the death process as something that you rush through and it just becomes a disposal, you know, bureaucracy of the remains. We're not cognizant to the impact that it does to the children who come after, because then they have no language. So what I found the serendipity of this moment was that in that chapter of Baba's Gone, I actually found a national language for grief. And I hope then that people then in reading it could make sense of the larger tragedy of Raila Odinga's passing. So that was there was the second question you asked. It was in the context of
Europe.
Yes, Europe, the translocation. This is always a more difficult one. In one of my chapters, I write about my grandmother, one of my favorite grandmothers, passing. And I'm named after Oyunga. My name was her husband, so that's who I'm named after. And I'm not able to, because it's the COVID years, I'm not able to make the journey back home. And over time, as you say, the death rate here, one of the things that strikes me when I come here during the COVID era is COVID is happening. I'm looking at the death rates in the statistics, but I'm not seeing any funeral processions. I'm not seeing any hearses moving. I'm wondering, I know they are dying, but where are the funerals happening? What's going on around these places? There's no, so how it's culturally what it formed is that I'm expecting, in a neighborhood in Kenya, you know, if there's a funeral, you will know there's a funeral. You know what I mean? The mood just changes around the next neighborhood's house, and we kind of socially adapt accordingly. You know, Pole, you know, even if we don't know who you are, we're just like, we're socialized to do it. I'm coming into society where it's the exact opposite. It's like, oh no, give us space, mind your own business. Like, close out. So my instinct is like, hugs people, come on. We need to be around together. What are you doing alone? And the social cue I'm getting is like, no. You're intrusive. Step back. And then you find the other Kenyans who have been here, because they try and take cue from your countrymen, and they become Europeanized. They also behave the same. So you really have no negotiation how to do it. And so I find myself in this in-between world. One is that since we never quite get rid of our Kenyan lines, you know, like a Kenyan Safaricom line because of M-Pesa, you find that you're always been included in funeral committees. So our way of participating becomes Uchambo. At least I contributed something. My name appeared on the list. He hasn't forgotten us. He's not lost his way. So that's how I start to negotiate. It becomes very transactional. You know, what's happened? Okay, do you have an M-Pesa number? Okay. I'll send it, and that's about how it ends. When is the funeral? Is it been live streamed? Okay. We'll be there on live stream, we'll watch it on live stream, and we'll do our RIPs in the comments. And we're doing it as social insurance. So that if anything happens to us and we're far away, people remember, at least that one didn't forget us. So that's the challenge we're dealing with. And it's more difficult because we have young children now who are now, all they know is this world. They don't even know that world. At least we have the negotiation of both worlds. You know, we have to say, this one, all they know is this world. They can't fit into the European context, but there's no African context to fall back on. So it's an in-between, it's in a way, so it's a crisis for us, generationally, I think, that we have to now devise new rules of how we're going to deal with this phenomenon. And then what's happening more and more is that we're no longer burying back home. We're now being forced to do the phenomenon of people dying, and the remains have got to be dealt with here. This is the last spot. We're not dealing with the phenomenon where people have spent more time abroad than they've spent at home. So even if you took them back home, it's like they don't know where they're there. All of their people, all of their children are here. So then, how then do we reinvent our rituals, our technologies of mourning in order to fit this modern world? This is what I attempt to do with the book. That to say that the beat continues, you know, and new rules have to be formed, new rituals have to be formed. But ultimately, what we must not forget, and this is the point I try and make, is the ritual, the importance of the ritual. When I hear about the Ghanaian culture, and I'm told 6 months, in the beginning I just thought, it makes no sense. But until you sit down and understand the ritual, then you say, okay, there's a context to it. So in a way, we have to kind of find our rituals that hold us together. Because without it, it's brokenness. It's reduced to disposal. And that's the saddest thing that we can do to ourselves as humanity. Yeah.
Thank you for that reflection.
Yes. Thank you very much. I also, like others said before me, I look forward to reading your book, and congratulations for writing it. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on some authorship issues. One thing I agree very much with you, and I like very much about what you said. Yeah. You said many things that I like, but one of the things you said that I like very much is that you said the audience owns you. That, I mean, as a writer, as an artist, as a public figure, the audience owns you. And they can own you in good or bad ways. They can own you, and I'm sure in your case, from the way the Kenyans are reacting, you've been owned in a very good way, like a positive way. But sometimes if things don't go as well, I mean, I'm not a novel writer, I'm an academic. My wife is a novel writer, write novels, but I'm an academic writer. When I write, and depending on the way the book is received, in my next book, I try something, what I call repair strategies. I try to address, especially if the book was reviewed by some people. So I just wanted to come back to you on this issue of audience ownership. And I wanted to ask, for all these 10 years, have you tried to repair? I mean, have you, in some of your work, did you try to repair certain things that you were not understood? I mean, for earlier columns, do you have some repair strategies in your work?
Yeah, actually, now that you give me a term for it, the book is a repair strategy. That's a very good, I didn't have the language for that. I didn't realize that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
But the book is a repair strategy. Yeah, because I write, and it was so difficult to, and Martin is not a bad thing, you know, it's in the sense of, it's good to celebrate it. But of course, it came with a kind of, there's an intensity to it. And I know this is the pre-internet time where everybody writes to the editor, and so there's a deep intimacy to you and the audience, in a way that even when I left Montauk many years later, people could not think of me outside of Montauk. Almost the point, why have you stopped writing? I'll be writing other things I'm writing, other beautiful work. Why have you stopped writing? Why aren't you writing Montauk? When are you going back to Montauk? You need to bring back that column. Where are the old columns? Put them together. Where's the book of Montauk? And it just became, everything I just had was just Montauk. And I always give it like a character who was, I give the example of Denzel Washington, who's been this one character, then he becomes a bad guy in one character, in one movie, and people are like, hey, what are you doing in that? That's not you. Go back to what you know. You don't do bad guy, you don't die before the end of the movie. So in a way, it's how do you get, so I was dealing with two complexities. One is that, how do you get not lost in that characterization? In a way, it comes, and it's also very addictive. Because that's also the drive of fame, or popularity at least. You know, you live for it and you forget yourself completely. So the first, like, how do you move away from that? And that's what I try and reflect in the book. And for me then, which is why interesting enough, that became the doorway, the metaphor. Because when I speak about loss here, and being the umbrella term for loss, that and loss of many things, is that throughout my career, I lose a lot. And for example, when the column ends, it's a deep loss. There's actually a grieving. So a lot of what I'm going through after that is this idea that I'm no longer relevant. You know, I'm supposed to, because the script is that it's supposed to peak. You know what I mean? You know? Lupita Nyong'o, everybody knows Lupita Nyong'o. You know? You were here, then you're in Hollywood, then you're Oscar. That's the game. That's how it's supposed to be. You know? You don't get here and then you go to the village. Yeah. You know, that doesn't work that way. That's not in the script. Yeah. So it was first dealing with that level of loss, and I realized you got to give me a lot to reflect on. In the game of repair, I realized that I need to start the inner work. The inner work of like, okay, so yeah, that's the part of it, but who are you? If we strip all of these things, who remains there? Okay, so you go to, I don't know, Laos. They don't speak English. They don't read the newspaper. They see a black man. none of my credentials count there. What remains? What are they seeing? And I was forced to deal with that hard question. It took me a long time. And the pathway, of course, was spirituality. You know, so then you go into matters of spirit, you know, matters of divinity, matters of understanding yourself, which is where then I found some tools for that level of reflection. But then more importantly there's the societal imperative that we must do as artists. You know, we must understand our time and place in the moment. And one of the things I started to, and this is why then death and grief becomes kind of like what I grapple with, is that I realized generationally, and those of you from my generation will understand what has happened to us tragically, especially those we call the Generation X. Those who survive structural adjustment programs. It's a whole different reality of SAPS, you know, of where we never quite arrive. And you get to kind of what you think is supposed to be the culmination of your life, and everything is just unraveling below you. You know, and if you think about it from the metaphor of a country, is that we're supposed to be here, but it's as though we're going back to 1960 problems. You know? And so this kind of becomes, it's playing out in different levels, not just in my life, but in how I'm seeing in society. So then I realized that then in going through reflecting on death, I realized that the real gift of it is the reflection on life. Because we can pontificate about how somebody dies or how they live, but the thing that we do with deep insight is how did they live? That's what a eulogy is. And the problem with the eulogies, as we were reflecting on it, we're reduced to work histories. So if you look at somebody's eulogy, it's like, oh, okay, worked in the embassy in Vienna, very appropriate, went to school here, that's really the work history. Everything else is forgotten. So my attempt here is to understand, like, what is the mundane aspects of life that truly count, that really endure? What is it that we remember? And it's actually the experientialness, the presence of living, the ability to be present at a moment like this. That's really what counts. But how do you communicate that? For a generation that has gone from saying that, what is your job? What are you doing with your life? Where do you work again? Where did you go to school? That's all that is prompted. How do we go beyond that? And one of the easiest way to do that is that it's at the point of death. People, if the realization that people have is that you're going to die, if the realization comes profoundly that you're going to die, then the only control you have really over is how you live. And this is what I hope then I end up communicating. So that for people then to see my journey as a young man who thinks he understands society, but is completely naive, has the gift of words, but I'm only saying what I can see within my reality, and then to go full circle and say, wow, now I start to see afresh. And what I actually start to see is that life is precious, and we have to hold on to it, because we could lose it.
Time's going here. I was going to ask you a question. I like that you mentioned the culture too, but also like this, living the reality of who we are. Do you think we lack the insight, like to really see like our lived reality, like even to communicate to our children, and even from what we've learned through superstition and our parents, like the fear, that fear of mortality. Is it something that we fear getting past, to be able to talk about death and to be able to see grief like from that perspective of like the end of life is not really like the end of life. Like we really have legacies and things that can really like make us just understand some of these things we fear, like a vulnerability among men and even women to be able to have that open conversation.
Yeah. I think what we lack, in a way, so first of all, I think first of all, we're bombarded. We're a very distracted generation. I mean, it's amazing when we do a forum like this where we don't look at our phones for a minute, you know what I mean? So we underestimate the amount of distraction that's happening to us on a daily. I mean, I make jokes about my mother, who's now going to be 90, And man, she loves her phone. I'm like, Mom, it's like 70 years of your life you grew up without a smartphone. I mean, literally 80 years. And suddenly you're even, I'm done trying to get you to pay attention. It's just the power of the device. And this is, she's literally, my mom was before telex and fax. So, but now it's like, oh, she's WhatsApp and Facebook is she keeps me updated. So there's just that. There's a lot of distraction drawn in many ways that removes us from literally just the ultimate simplicity of life processes. Also, you have asked a very big question. Huh? So then there's also, if we look at society, our distractions in terms of modernity, colonialism, in terms of, we had basic guides in society. Society had, if you think about it, the ideal of the village. People had their roles, and people played their roles, and there were guides for each role. What has happened with the institutionalization and everything else that has happened is that a lot of these important roles just basically disappeared, or they were basically privatized, and they became this. So one of the gaps I found when I started writing this book, and I came across the term known as a death doula. And it's borrowed from the term like a birth doula. It's an American term where they, when somebody's about to have a baby, a child, somebody takes them through the entire process until the baby is delivered. And then I found this version of people called the death doulas is when, especially in the Western context, where there's a very clear end of life process, where somebody has perhaps a terminal disease and they're told you're going to die at a particular date. Then these people called death doulas come to walk you through the process. Now, I found that as a coping reinvention mechanism for something that we had lost. Because we are now in a society where we have no guides. There's nobody to tell us how to deal with these processes. There's nobody to prepare us for these realities. There's more importantly, no language to basically mediate it. One of the things I mentioned is how we communicate death to children. Kids who are under 6, 7 years old. And you find two schools of thought. Those who try and protect the children by denying completely, telling them nothing, oh, they're going to sleep, they're going to be the angels, and all of that. And then the others who, like us who are fortunate, were exposed to dead bodies by the time they're 5 years old. And how then we help shape our process. So since we don't have the cultural function, because it was lost and disrupted in the sense of death doulas, people who can actually help us, we have to reinvent it. And this is what I'm finding with the responsibility of living now after writing this book, is that I find now that if you can see the problem, then you want to solve it. Because the illusion for me always that it's somebody else's, government, something. There's always somebody else's problem to solve. And over the years I've come to realize that, hang on a minute, you know what I'm talking about this problem. So clearly I've always been thinking about it. So do something, give us some ideas. Hence, we go back and we write. And in a way for me that I think would be my encouragement for everybody is because you look at this brokenness in society in its many ways, but you can see it clearly. So you have to step into that gap. It might not feel impactful at the time, but over the years people appreciate what you've done. Because it's always a thread. Somebody always does something small and somebody else builds up on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we'll have to end our conversation here, but it doesn't end here. Oyunga has his books outside, and he'll sit there and you can buy a book and talk to him and ask him your question that you want, and he can sign the book for you. We are so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. This has been a very insightful conversation, and more importantly, having, as I'm saying, me as a mom of a 17-year-old, being able to have men having a conversation about emotions, about grief, about how it is that we are also as a man allowed to go through that emotion, to go through that grief, and to learn from it and to express it. It's, I think, a very important conversation to have. This is why I thought it was very impactful to have you here. So thank you so much, and thank you that we have the books here, so everybody, you were able to do that. So thank you so much for being here. I will now invite Koki to give us our final vote of thanks. Thank you so much.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I hope you all had a wonderful time, because I did. And just to say, for those who grew up in the era of Ojwang, Katwende, was it Mlango Kumi? There were all those wonderful programs. I think we'll also remember there's a club that the late President Daniel Arap Moi was very popular. So I'll invite all of us, those who remember that club, just to say thank you. They're all Latinos, right? So you warm up your hands.
Funga.
Okay, so who help me with this one. Funga. Fungua. Funga. Asante. Wakuja. Tumefurahi sana. Asanteni. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Embassy of the Republic of Kenya in Vienna, I extend our deepest gratitude to each one of you for gracing this evening of memory and cultural dialogue. Your presence has enriched this occasion and reaffirmed the power of literature to unite us across nations, cultures, and experiences. We are profoundly grateful to Mr. Oyunga Pala, whose remarkable work, Strength and Sorrow, Reflections of the Ones We Lost, has provided us with a lens through which to reflect on grief, resilience, and the shared humanity that binds us all. His words remind us that storytelling is not only an art, but also a form of diplomacy, building bridges of empathy and understanding. Our sincere appreciation goes to the members of the diplomatic corps, representatives of international organizations, the Kenyan diaspora, and the general public who joined us tonight. Your participation underscores the importance of cultural exchange in strengthening ties between Kenya, Austria, and the wider international community. We also acknowledge the invaluable support of our partners and colleagues who worked tirelessly to make this event possible. To the organizing team, your dedication has ensured that this evening will be remembered not only for its intellectual depth, but also for its warmth and spirit of solidarity. As we reflect on the themes of loss and resilience, particularly in the light of the passing of our beloved leader, Honorable Raila Odinga, may tonight's gathering inspire us to honor cherished memories with dignity and to carry forward the strength found in the shared stories. To our loved ones who have gone before us, may their souls continue to rest in eternal peace. Finally, we thank you all for standing with Kenya in celebrating its literary voice and may this evening mark the beginning of many more opportunities to engage in dialogue, foster understanding, and deepen the bonds of friendship between our peoples. Now you are all invited to enjoy snacks, refreshments as you interact more with the council.
Thank you very much. As we exit, and since Oyunga has invited us to think about crafting new tools, I want to, please get me a glass of water. I want to toast, to suggest a toast. As the water comes, just one glass. I want to say, listening to you and having started reading but not completed it, my reflection is that the obituaries or eulogies aren't written by those of us who read them. They are written by the silent dead who lived. They offer them to us as a gift, a mirror, broken or whole, to see ourselves, our humanity. That's why we describe the non-physical attributes as opposed to the physical. We talk about them being generous as opposed to them having been handsome or beautiful. We talk about them having been kind. This way, they remind us of our interconnectedness, that we are a community. Generosity only makes sense with reference to the other.